The first step was overcoming opposition, which frankly was probably the biggest step. And I know I've already kind of mentioned that, of the doctors telling you no, the society telling you no, this is something to be celebrated. This is who they are. And I understand that, of course, we love our children for whoever they are, but I want them to be as healthy as they can be. And it was clear to me that there was a very huge health deficit that they had when they regressed. This was not a typical development. So, and I did want to point out too, that when you're overcoming this opposition from friends, from family telling you, what are you doing? Or you can't do this, or whatever, the kind of naysayers. I mean, there's a lot of studies. I found 29 studies on PubMed that actually discuss recovery of the diagnosis of autism. And, they'll either call it optimal outcomes or whatnot. And the studies show anywhere from 9% to up to 25% in one study, kids can lose their diagnosis. So my story is not necessarily a one-off.
Hello and welcome to Autism Parenting Secrets. This week, I'm joined by Nicole Rincon. She's a board-certified physician assistant, microbiologist, and all-in mom of 13-year-old triplets. Her unique vantage point as both a medical professional and a parent on a healing mission makes this conversation one that you won't want to miss. Nicole's journey mirrors many of ours. Her children faced regression, gut dysfunction, and environmental toxicity. Yet today they're thriving. She didn't wait for answers. She took bold, informed action. Today we will break down the essential steps that help shift the trajectory for her kids, insights every parent deserves to know sooner. The secret this week is take 3 vital steps. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate this. And thank you for my background. I do practice medicine. I'm a PA, as you mentioned. I've been a PA for 17 years, but I practice at Rossignol Medical Center. I work alongside the brilliant doctors, Dr. Fry, Dr. Rossignol, along with other practitioners. So we're all one practice, and we also conduct a lot of clinical research too. So just wanted to throw that out there. We're kind of wearing a lot of hats, and it's quite a fun and rewarding job. So if you don't mind, I was going to share my story with the audience.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I mean, the people you mentioned as part of that practice, all dynamite practitioners, all with different ways of helping and serving parents. So I appreciate that you mentioned that. And yes, let's hear more about your journey as a mom of triplets. And again, I think our listeners would be very interested in knowing more of the backstory.
Yeah, thank you. So the kind of the more abbreviated version. So I met my husband and we got married. After a few years of marriage, we decided we wanted to try and conceive, and had some difficulty and underwent fertility treatments, essentially. And after basically the third time, we got pregnant with triplets. Miracle. It was wonderful. And I went through the pregnancy, and it was a very difficult pregnancy, as you can imagine, but they were born at 34 weeks, 2 boys and a girl. And they, they spent about 2 weeks in the NICU for feeding difficulties, but we brought them home very healthy, very happy babies. As a PA, at home, I was monitoring their developmental steps and their weight and weighing them every week and doing all these, measurements as clinicians do. And basically they were tracking normally. So blessed. I was so grateful. And then at around 18 months, I noticed my one son started to have speech difficulties. And he woke up in the mornings, he was starting to get a tremor, strangely. And he was going to eat his Cheerios or whatever he was eating at the time. He would shake. So we got a workup we went to the doctor and they said, well, maybe this is autism. They sent us to the regional center. We were getting a workup at that time, but the diagnosis wasn't clear because he still had some speech, but it was getting kind of garbled. It was a little strange. And then about a few months into that journey of getting him worked up, during the summer, my son, over the course of maybe 2 to 4 weeks, we lost him, my other son. He lost all speech. So his regression was severe. He had 2-word sentences. He basically went from no sounds, even just completely nonverbal, smearing his feces on the wall where he'd been potty trained. No eye contact, wouldn't let me hug him or touch him. And that happened over the course, like I said, of about a month. And then a couple weeks later, I noticed my daughter started having absence seizures. and she would just stare at the wall and start lip smacking. And I mean, this was all when they were about 2 years old. And, it was so devastating. I had no idea even this could happen and this severity. I mean, the shock and the disbelief. So, of course, as most parents do, I went into kind of a denial, disbelief. I took about 6 months off of work. I was kind of drowning. It was a fog. And I went to the neurologist and I said, what can we do about this? Or I went to my pediatrician rather, and he just kind of shrugged and said, well, it looks like autism. This is what happens. And then I went to a neurologist and they said, yep, this is autism. This is what happens. Here's some risperidone to stop the stimming and the spinning in a circle. And that's what you get. And I mean, that visit was just so vivid in my mind because I still remember it because that was the moment that I decided this is not right. When an adult loses speech, regresses, they do MRIs, CTs, lumbar punctures, blood work, all this workup. When a child severely regresses, they do nothing. So anyway, I did what most parents do. I got online, PubMed, 2 a.m., sleepless nights, found some studies. The first one I came across was the apraxia study for omega-3 with vitamin E. Started giving it to my kids, and I noticed that my son stopped stimming or reduced the stimming, and his eye contact came back. He'd actually look at me now a little bit here and there. And I thought, oh my gosh, I turned to my husband. I said, I think there's something here. I basically spent the next 6 months from there doing it on my own, adding in things here and there. We added in some N-acetylcysteine, stopped giving Tylenol, little things. We did multivitamin with some folates, just a small dose, some vitamin D. Anyway, I decided along the journey that I really needed professional help. This was too much for me. I was getting overwhelmed. I was crashing out. So I was just not sleeping. So I went to the MAPS, which is the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs. I'm sure you're very aware. And I went up to Dr. Rosignol. I approached him immediately. I said, who's the guy here? I didn't even know who he was. And I went to the first day on the first conference and I said, hey, I'm a PA. Can you hire me? And he's like, well, when? I guess, well, now. And he said, well, are you licensed? I said, yes, I've been a PA 10 years. So I got hired on the spot and I've been working there ever since. And so it's really been this whole life-changing journey for me to treat autism and also, treat my children. And so I worked with him. We've uncovered a lot. We did every kind of testing that I could think of, lots of treatments. And now fast forward, they're 13, both my boys, they're obviously all 13. But both of my boys are so much better. My one son that severely regressed, ironically, he actually recovered and lost his diagnosis as of a couple of years ago. And then my other son he's doing really well too. He's in general ed. He has friends, getting straight A's, very smart, very verbal. So he's still kind of on the spectrum, but just barely. So I have hope that eventually we may lose his as well. And then my daughter has now been seizure free for a decade. So there's, this is kind of my journey, and I really wanted to share it because, I think that I wanted to come on today to just let parents know this is possible. And of course, we don't know the outcomes of every child. And, maybe I got lucky and maybe this was always going to be, but I certainly could see, I feel like there were certain things I did. And ironically, it was different things for each child that really helped along their journey. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure our listeners, so many are relating to it because in everything that you described specifically with your journey, while it's unique to you, the high level beats are pretty similar for, I think, a lot of our listeners and including myself. And there's so many questions I want to ask you. And one that I know I want to know is for each of your kids, you said that it was different for each of them. So can you touch on, in terms of high level root cause, was there a dominant root cause that now looking back on it for each child was most prevalent for each of them individually? Because I know it's multifactorial, but just high level.
It is. Definitely. There's a few key things that, for each child. And, so I've obviously thought about this a lot. So there was, in my one son, there was that severely regressed, he, I believe, had a severe copper toxicity at the time and probably very low zinc because his hair was red. I mean, he was just really pale, very red hair. And my husband is Hispanic. I'm Italian. This is very not like us to have this kind of coloring. So I think a lot of that set it up. Again, we were giving him a lot of Tylenol. And he's my kid that kind of dipped in and out of, abnormal liver function tests. So then we also, we had at the time of regression, we had a mold leak in our house, a water leak in our house behind the tub. And we'd kind of busted open the wall and we didn't account for molds. Like, we didn't know any better. My husband and I were young kids and we didn't remediate it properly. And we just lived in it. So I think that was what kind of triggered it with the acute onset. And of course it was diet. I mean, we weren't eating we had no special diet. We were eating, our main oil was like canola oil at the time. And, we were just cooking with GMO foods and didn't really know the difference. So, the short answer, for my one son, I think that it was a little bit of metalopathy, like metal toxicity, definitely diet. And for him, mold. That was kind of the kid that severely regressed. For my other son, he had regressed a little earlier, and I noticed even him early on, he had kind of a smaller head circumference. And he really, really picked up when we gave leucovorin, which was that high-dose folinic acid. And I noticed, as we started to ramp it up, his cognition improved, his attention, his speech. So he had a pretty clear improvement with leucovorin. So whereas my other son, I didn't notice a lot of difference. So different interventions for two different kids with the same gestation, same house, same mom and dad. So,
and then for your daughter,
my daughter. So a lot of it was we did leucovorin. I think that helped too. I think she also had cerebral folate deficiency. So treating that was helpful. Also, she had some pretty high fungal markers as well. So, and I think she had some mast cell activation. So I think basically treating the yeast, the fungus, kind of suppressing some of the histamines, and then treating the folate was very helpful too for her.
Great. Yeah, no. So I appreciate you fast forwarding because I think high level. I think I'm intrigued. Right, you have such a controlled experiment. Unintentional, but 3 different kids, 3 potentially different root causes that really were more behind perhaps how they were presenting, and the with leucovorin that you mentioned and the whole folate opportunity. I know Dr. Fry was on this podcast a couple of months ago. It was episode 245. I'll include it in the show notes. But if you want to better go deeper dive into that approach, Dr. Fry, I think there's no better expert to speak to that than Dr. Fry. So thank you for that high level. And so now I'll hand it to you wherever you want to go. But I know you do feel strongly about that. There were kind of 3 vital steps in terms of how you were navigating. Can you touch on those?
Yeah. And again, they're not, they don't have to be, I think that I just think of my own journey and kind of in a linear time frame. And the first step was overcoming opposition, which frankly was probably the biggest step. And I know I've already kind of mentioned that, of the doctors telling the society telling this is something to be celebrated. This is who they are. And I understand that, of course, we love our children for whoever they are, but I want them to be as healthy as they can be. And it was clear to me that there was a very huge health deficit that they had when they regressed. This was not a typical development. So, and I did want to point out too, that when you're overcoming this opposition from friends, from family telling you, what are you doing? Or you can't do this, or whatever, the kind of naysayers. I mean, there's a lot of studies. I found 29 studies on PubMed that actually discuss recovery of the diagnosis of autism. And, they'll either call it optimal outcomes or whatnot. And the studies show anywhere from 9% to up to 25% in one study, kids can lose their diagnosis. So my story is not necessarily a one-off. I mean, it is a pretty miraculous story because I honestly didn't believe it was possible. And as I started to believe, obviously it came true, but it does happen. It does happen. And, the studies show that kids that maybe are higher functioning, improve, greater or more likely to recover. I kind of wanted to bring up my point that, well, for me, my children regressed, and my one son had a severe regression. And that is statistically super unlikely to recover. So, I'm glad that I didn't listen to the studies. I'm glad I didn't listen to the naysayers because, I think that regardless of where your child's at, I think improvement can be made. And there are studies to back this up. So it's not just my story as a one-off, I guess is my point there.
I love how you phrased it. And again, even with my coaching and the parents I'm coaching, I see these incredible improvements time and time again, especially when the parent gets really equipped to navigate well, which none of us were really taught how to do that, right? Especially if you start like you did with more conventional practitioners who may not have the right toolkit or the right perspective and may not be very encouraging. But no, and I totally get that this is such a point of frustration for many parents, this struggle with, wanting something like recovery or healing. And again, wanting more for your child, you never have to apologize for that. But in terms of what specifically you're aiming for, again, that can, if you're aiming for, okay, that has to be that this diagnosis is lost, that could create a lot of pressure and a lot of friction that doesn't help. So I think the way you described it really, it resonated with me, because what we really want as parents is for our children to thrive, to be the best version of themselves that they can. And we can do that unapologetically, but to have some, I won't be happy unless this happens goal, usually as well intentioned as that may be, really sets you up for a challenging journey.
Exactly. And, there's no real time frame. I mean, the studies show that recovery typically happens 2 to 4 years after diagnosis, but I'm so glad I didn't give up, because, 2 years, I mean, my son barely started to make sounds 2 years after he regressed. I mean, it was 2 years of complete silence. And, so I'm glad I didn't give up and say, well, we did it for 2 years and now we're done. And so it's this kind of relentless, just optimism. And, you have to take breaks, like you said, and kind of be realistic. But at the same time, like, it's a journey, right? And that's why I call it the healing journey. And then, I wanted to bring up the second point, just to kind of, tying in what we're talking about, is that the second point is find your team. And this is a vital step, because it really, I was trying to do it on my own. I know a lot of parents do, and it's very overwhelming, and it's very hard on me. I mean, during this whole process, I got so stressed out. I had to get my gallbladder removed because I was breaking down. I wasn't sleeping and I was stressed out. And so, we obviously, I'm biased because now I've worked almost a decade at an integrative medicine practitioner office. So we're doctors and PAs. But you can find, a lot of different practitioners out there. We try, obviously, my recommendation is to utilize somebody that has some evidence-based medicine, like we were talking about, that folinic acid to treat folate receptor antibodies, or maybe, you treat some mitochondrial dysfunction or gut dysfunction. And really, finding a practitioner that's going to look at all the systems. I think that's really key, because when I see a lot of patients come in, and when I first started looking, you kind of want this whole in one. You want the stem cell treatment that's going to turn around my child, the fecal transplant that's going to be the thing, the 40 dives of hyperbaric, whatever it is. But what I found in my kids, certainly, and then in the patients I treat, is that, like I mentioned, it's different for every child. So you really do need to look at, like in our clinic, we look at immune function and markers. We look at gut function in depth with organic acid stool tests. We look at metabolic markers, like we know zinc is often low, vitamin D, cholesterol, iron. These things are all very strongly correlated with autism. Folate receptor antibodies are positive in up to 75% of kids with autism, approximately. We know mitochondrial dysfunction. We look at that frequently, the energy production. So, and then we also look at metal toxicities, and so it's really important to have a holistic view, because every kid is like you said, it's a heterogeneous disease, which means basically there's different causes and different presentations. So, having somebody that can really navigate you through the process will be really key. And I don't think I could have done it without the help of, Rosignol Medical Center, Dr. Rosignol, Dr. Fry, and they navigated me. And now after a decade, I'm helping navigate families. And if, I did want to mention too, I didn't want to go into the specifics of everything we do today. But I have an X, profile, x.com, or, former Twitter. And on my profile is pinned my talk presentation that I give, that's an hour long, about in depth of what I do for testing and treatment. So if you want to get to the nitty gritty of what did Nicole test for, what does she normally do, what does a visit look like, you can look at that there. But for the purposes of today, I just wanted to say that it's important to look at everything. And again, because you don't know what your child's going to need. And then the other point to that too is that you want to find a practitioner, and maybe you need multiple practitioners, because sometimes you'll find somebody that's good at, we were just talking about this before our podcast, someone good at mito or metabolic or different areas, but maybe you need a nutritionist, maybe you need a dietitian, maybe you need someone that kind of, you need a team. I was very grateful to have multiple practitioners I could talk to in the space. And I did consult with them as to, hey, what do you think? And how should I do this? Studies show that, kind of throwing the kitchen sink at it, having a comprehensive approach can be helpful. So even ABA, speech, OT, those can be very helpful. I think, in conjunction. I mean, alone, it may not be resolving the issues you're looking for in your child, like speech or fine motor, but certainly, looking, like I said, again, that's why I said find your team, because there's often needs to be multiple people working in conjunction that really resonate with you, that really work with you, your child likes, you like. And, don't be afraid to consult other people too. I mean, we've saw GI along the way, and endocrinologists and, all kinds of specialists to help get second opinions. So.
Yep. I love everything you just shared, and the team is so incredibly important. So you started off, right? I'm going to do it myself, because your other practitioners who are more conventional weren't really helping, didn't have many solutions for you. So you did it alone, and then realized, okay, I need to formulate the team. And what you just said toward the end, I thought was the most important, in that for a parent to do that, it's important for them to think about what are they looking for, which I think a lot of parents don't think about, because they just want to know who's that doctor, who's recommended, who is hot right now, or who are people, with positive word of mouth. And I think that's the key, is for a parent just to take a little bit of time to think, what am I looking for? What are the qualities I'm looking for in a practitioner, which might include their philosophy, their approach, more integrative or functional. Or, because otherwise, what do people mostly do for practitioners? It's like, where did they go to school? Did they go to a good college? Like, no, you want to make sure someone's a fit for your philosophy, your strategy. And then things like, do they listen to you? Do they actually want your input and feedback? The dynamic in any kind of relationship can vary wildly. So if a parent can do that, then again, they have a much better chance of then finding a practitioner who's a good fit for them, instead of just who somebody recommends.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's wonderful working in like a practice, because I'm a mom and I have my mom stories, and I'm giving, how do you make banana pancakes that are gluten-free, dairy-free? And, I have a lot of navigation through my own diet and things like that for my kids. Whereas like obviously Dr. Fry and Dr. Rosignol, while we all conduct clinical research, they've published 80 plus studies and whatnot. So depends on, and they're all very useful. Like you said, it's a very much a, what are you looking for? And often, again, you can always try different people out. Like it doesn't have to be this like, okay, I'm committed to you forever for the next 10 years indefinitely, So I love talking to everybody about it. Hey, what do you think? What do you think? That's my approach.
And is there anything that jumps out at you as being like a big mistake that parents might make with respect to the team? So the one that jumps out at me is the obvious one, which is abdicating decision-making to some medical professional, as opposed to the parent really understanding and owning and being that true decision maker. So I know I wanted nothing more than some doctor just, please tell me what to do, because I don't want to make the decisions. So I know that is something I would recommend to parents. No, you want to always, have that team, have great advisors, but you're the decision maker. So would you agree with that? Or is there any other big mistake that you think parents might make with respect to their team?
I think that's really key. And to kind of add to that, what I find is that parents, they come in and they're very overwhelmed by the process, as is understandable and as I was. And so, like you said, their communication, they may not want to say the wrong thing. And maybe, like you said, they don't feel good about something you've recommended or that you're looking at, but they don't say anything. And so that communication piece of just like, basically, like you said, speak your mind and say, hey, I'm not sure. What about this? Or can we look at that? I love it when parents come to me and really drive, I think this happened, and what about that? And I'd like to try this. And obviously, we'll have a discussion, but yes, being able to be, don't be afraid to communicate with your provider. And like you said, if you're not getting that communication feedback, it should be a feedback loop of they're speaking, you're speaking, you listen, and you're making a plan that everybody's like, this is a good plan. Okay, let's move forward. And you do it again and again when you meet up. So yes, the communication is the key. And, again, like you said, feel free to, a lot of parents I find too, they get really stuck with, well, there's one provider, or, I don't want to make them mad. It's like, no, see everybody, talk to everybody. I tell them, please, like, this is a team. I want as many people on the team. I want to have a think tank for every patient, because some are a lot easier to, they respond very quickly, and some of them are a little trickier. So absolutely.
Yeah, and the right practitioner will not get mad at you, right? Like, in other
No,
words,
no.
they'll want your input. Now, that said, I know there's many parents who might go to a meeting with a practitioner and be presenting lots of things to them that isn't medical related, that might be tangential. So again, I think take the time that you get with a practitioner, make the most of it, be prepared. But otherwise, the right practitioner will also be curious, will want your input. And again, that might be one of those underlying qualities that you may not think of before you choose who's on your team. But that really, really does matter, including, for those consults, for enough time to be given, for you to have that kind of dialogue. So, I think that's all very helpful. And again, it's an underappreciated aspect of this journey is that, you get to hire and fire that team, and the quality of that team and how good of a fit are they for you and your specific child is something I think that I wish I gave more attention to earlier on before a lot of starts and stops with practitioners who weren't really a fit.
Yeah. I mean, I was stubborn. I mean, I'm the worst patient because I'm a medical provider. So like, and early on in the journey, Dr. Rosignol would recommend things and I'd be like, no, not going to do that. And I tell him, no, but this was, yeah, no. And, but, because I think parents intuitively know, I mean, obviously they don't, it's, I don't want to put all the onus back on the parents, but your child, when they eat these foods or when they're here or whatnot, or you have some intuition as to what happened, and what's happening. And, no one's going to know your child better than yourself. So if you're doing something and it doesn't feel right, they're not responding well, and, maybe your gut's telling you like, I don't think this is it, then, maybe move on. Tell the provider that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And if I could just throw out a comment on that, there's the parent's intuition, right? Which is extremely important. You do, and just as Nicole said, your child better than anybody. Nobody comes close. So there is this intuition that is worth paying attention to. But what I've learned is that sometimes parents like myself may feel like they have an intuition to maybe not do something, but it's not because of their sense of what's right for their child. It might be that they just don't want to do it. It might be laziness. Oh, that sounds hard. So what I seize on is that for parents, the key is informed intuition. Like for you to trust your gut, but take the time to understand what the doctor is recommending, ask why, really understand it. Because if it's just kind of like, oh, wait, that special diet sounds super hard. My intuition says, no, we don't want to do this. Then again, you may miss an opportunity. So I think that that's the key. Trust your intuition. But if you're unclear, get more informed, go to PubMed, ask lots of questions repeatedly until you have that good base level understanding. It won't be as expert as maybe the provider you're working with, but from that greater informed place, yes, then tap into your intuition and that will guide you.
Yes. Yeah. Intuition's huge. And like you said, that discernment is obviously very key. And yeah, it can be very hard. I have sympathy because I've been there, like what is my fear talking and what is my intuition talking?
Right.
And it can be very difficult to navigate and know the difference. But for me, I would try things, and if I saw some improvement, I think, okay, I'm on a right track. You give things a few days grace or however long they tell you, but then you give yourself a time point. Like, okay, there's die-off for this medication, for example, and you give them 3 days, 5 days. And then it's like, well, they're not really improving. And as a matter of fact, they're getting worse. I'm inclined to not push that anymore. Okay, there's no more die-off. Let's move on. I'm not, maybe it's the right med, but at the wrong time when we're giving it, in the journey. So my point is, yeah, there is a point where you have to call it.
Great. All right. Well, that covers a lot of really important concepts. So I think are we arriving at the third step?
The third step, and that's exactly. So it is a good natural transition because the point is basically that change is needed for change. So essentially you have to change, or some things have to change in the family in order to see change in your child. So this is kind of that acceptance of, okay, that some of these things might be for, lifelong. Like, for example, when I cut out all of the inflammatory GMO oils out of my house, we switched mostly to coconut oil and ghee, and a little bit of tallow, but really we just, and sometimes some olive oil, if we don't cook it, unheated. But when we switched oils, I found that their attention, they calmed way down. Their attention went way up. And I just found that they were less stimmy, and I noticed now when we eat out, because we rarely eat out, we cook all our meals. I can see that they get hyper afterwards and they're kind of bouncing off the wall. I'm like, oh yeah, because we ate out. So, basically the changes that you find in your kids, I realized early on the diet was important, and especially healthy fats, particularly for me. So when, so now it's been a decade and we still cook this way. And this is probably going to be a lifestyle, change for us. And it has been, because when you find something that's working, unfortunately, it's not like we can just go back and now we can eat canola. Oh, now we're going to eat McDonald's French fries. And, so the change has to be lifelong for things that you think are meaningful for your family. I love that whole Hippocrates, before you heal someone, ask him if he's willing to give up the things that are making him sick, and for my kids, a lot of it was screen time too. And I know that it's, when they regressed, they were 2, we were staring at a lot of screens, and I don't know how much that really had an impact. And I'm on no high horse. They still get screens today, but I really try. I get them outside every day. We have to do some kind of exercise activity every day. I feel like, for a lot of it's kind of back to basics, to really optimize their health. And, it's difficult. I want to just give them screens and, and do my laundry and, but a lot of these healthy choices, I kind of see myself as, trying to biohack. I'm in the longevity biohacking space now for my kids. How are we going to make them the healthiest versions of themselves? So a lot of things are the supplements. We were able to back off of a lot of what we were doing, but there's still some key supplements that we still take and we'll probably take for life, like the omegas, some vitamin D, some zinc, the leucovorin we're still on after a decade. So, some things you can, because parents get really worried. They say, oh my gosh, am I going to have to do all of this forever? And how are we going to do this? And I say, well, some things you're going to be able, you're going to have to keep, and some things we can discard. And so, you take it day by day and understand that, that it is a lifestyle change. And that's okay. And you have to be willing to accept that. And just kind of roll with it. Cause I want to have healthy kids, and I love when every day I look at them and they're, hi mom, and I almost start crying. The gratitude for me doesn't go away. So like, of course I'm going to make them food, and of course I'm going to do what I can. So, it is kind of having that mindset of this, when you get to the point where you're happy, it's a marathon, just, okay, well, here we do, this is what we do now. And, we're changed, so that's, and obviously too, I do want to say one thing too, as far as the symptoms are concerned. I don't want to paint this picture that they're all perfect and, we skipped off and lived happily ever after. My son, we still have a little OCD symptoms, and we still have some stimming, and we do have things that are, a little bit of opposition. And so basically, you mentioned this earlier on the podcast, which I think is brilliant, is that, expectations are huge. I don't expect my children to be this idea of perfect, and it's okay that we still have issues going on, and we're always going to work on them. I'm just going to keep looking at it forever. As long as they're 18, as long as they let me, we'll keep doing labs and just kind of trekking along. But yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect to have a, optimal outcome.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that all that is very helpful. And again, I made the big mistake that, yes, all roads had to lead to my son being quote unquote normal and not having this diagnosis and being indistinguishable compared to other kids. And that was a real lousy, thing to cling to, because overall my son has progressed incredibly. And by the way, right now, I think even his nervous system is still, kind of ramped up. And it's because I'm sure of the screens, because, my wife Cass and I played great defense for a long time, but now he's 18 and he's using, and I can see the impact. And I try to like balance screen time with outside time. But guess what? I'm not balancing it. I might be offsetting some of that screen time. But yeah, I think the ultimate goal is that just to ditch this perception an expectation that you want your child to be normal. Again, just the goal is to help them be the best version of themselves that they can be. And my son is absolutely extraordinary in terms of gifts he has and how he's the nicest kid. Most people aren't, that's not normal. He's got incredible memory powers and so that's where you can really look at your child. They're going to have superpowers. They're going to have gifts. They're going to have aspects of how they operate that may still be, room for improvement. And again, you can kind of delight in just your child's progression wherever they're going, and just knowing that you're just trying to help them be better versions of themselves, not to become something that they're not.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like you said, it's enough to know that you're doing what you can. I mean, I wake up every morning and go, well, I can honestly say I did my best, and that makes me feel good. And wherever that lands, then that's what's meant to be. I mean, that's what I can do, like you said. And so that, gives me a lot of relief. And again, knowing that I have that team to go back to if I'm having problems. I mean, my anxiety is so much better than it used to be. I mean, a decade ago, I was just so ramped up about this. And so, just kind of having these coping strategies, again, are really help, having a healthy attitude and having steps and having a team. And, again, all these steps that I had, they kind of need to happen in order of the journey. And, you end up in a place where you look back and go, wow, that was really difficult and it was totally worth it, and, that's life, right? I mean, this is why we're alive. So I'm trying my best. And so I'm just trying to share that journey that, there's hope, there's people to help you. There's a lot you can do.
Well, I appreciate you sharing the details of your journey, and I can only appreciate how extreme it felt for you at times. And it sounds like you were in some significant degree of fight or flight, yourself, right, for years. So how much do you think you shifting into being calmer, more focused, more present, how much do you think that really impacted your three kids and their progression?
Yeah. I don't think I've told this story like publicly on a podcast, but basically I think, it was around the pandemic. And, so the kids would have been about 8 and they were doing okay, but they hadn't lost their diagnosis yet. We were still kind of in that in between. And I felt like we needed to get out of Dodge. I was feeling overwhelmed. I was just kind of crashing out, and I thought I just need to change. So we ended up moving to Las Vegas, Nevada. My mom has like a retirement home there. So we thought, well, we'll be with my mom. And I just needed to change the scenery, and we moved, and I was still working and seeing patients remotely, and we had new services, but, I felt like I had a fresh new start, because there were family issues and things going on. And it really helped calibrate me. I met some new friends, some new people. We bought a home because things were much more affordable there. Because, part of the financial crisis of Southern California is always a difficult thing to navigate. So just alleviating some of that financial pressure, and just, it really helped me. And I found that we were there only like a couple of years, but I really got grounded there. And it was so strange. It was almost like my own little personal journey where I had to go to the desert and like re-find myself, and then come back to the real world. And it was very much like that because, halfway through, when we were in the desert, in Las Vegas, my kids were just better. And they, we got my son evaluated at the regional center. They said, oh, he doesn't have his diagnosis anymore. I said, he doesn't? Like, no. And when we stuck him in school and they said no, and he was getting good grades and they put him in gen ed. And so, it wasn't like they were gaslighting me. I mean, he genuinely was better. And I had found that working on myself, like you said, we needed some financial security. We needed some separation from some family struggles. We needed, just a little time with our nuclear family because, we really needed to come together. The 5 of us, my husband and I and the 3 kids. And I felt like we needed that time of just us. And it really helped. It really helped bring us together. I felt more grounded. So yes, absolutely. Helping myself really helped, you know, progress my kids. I don't think, yeah, I mean, if I'd have just been tail spinning and, kind of staying in the same patterns, again, that's that change is needed for change. That third step of like, okay, I got to do something different. Like I'm in that same pattern with, whatever we're doing and, let's just change it up for a second, see what we can do.
Yeah, no, I think it's a powerful perspective because parents show up with a certain level of capability, certain habits, certain ability to problem solve, but none of us can see our blind spots, and we all have them. So again, what's in your way as a parent navigating the journey? That's going to be very unique to you. But if you just say, no, I'm only going to focus on my child, forget about me looking at myself and getting, as you did, more grounded, more present, and in a clearer position to really discern what's going to help my child the most. Because as I know you talk about, where you focus and how you help your child with your team, that sequencing really matters. So being able to make clear decisions is just the most important thing a parent can really focus on.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, yeah, like looking back in retrospect, it was probably the best thing. I mean, obviously there's other the medical interventions that were very, very key, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you cannot neglect yourself and expect to heal your kids. Absolutely. I mean, it's a big message.
It's an important one. I think that's a fantastic one to end on as we so I really do appreciate you sharing your personal perspectives because again, even though they're unique to your journey with your triplets, everything that you shared, I know in some way, can really benefit a parent to better understand and again, better take action, whatever it is for you to ground yourself, to get yourself into that stronger position. And also I just think that with your controlled experiment showed that every child's so wildly unique that what worked for another parent and another child may have nothing to do with what's happening with your child or what's going to help them the most, which is why that team that you mentioned is so important.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, yeah, I'll include in the show notes that Taka presentation that you mentioned and where people can better find you. But appreciate so much how you're serving parents, you and the entire Rosignol Center. And thanks so much for sharing your voice today.
Well, thank you for what you do, Len, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate you advocating for these parents and these kids and the families. It's crucial work. So thank you.
Absolutely. These parents deserve to be supported. And it's great that there's people like you out there, again, with perspective. And again, you are unique, right? With the mom hat and the professional hat. So I think your perspective truly is going to resonate with our listeners. So thanks again.
You're welcome.